Good evening, everyone. We are going to continue our work session, and I will begin with a very brief president's report. I just want to let the board know that the Chamber of Commerce luncheon and installation will be held on March 19th, I believe at noon at the Renaissance. And as everyone remembers from the past, and for our new board members, they honor some of our high school students with scholarships. So if anyone is interested in attending, and I did hear through the grapevine that someone else will be honored. Our superintendent, I believe, is receiving an award. Is it the Educational Ambassadors Award?
It is, yes.
Okay, so, if you'd like to come, please let me know or let Ms. Weldon know. And we would love your support there for our students and our superintendent. And that concludes my report, and I will go on to the superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to update everybody. We had our preschool lottery yesterday morning in this room here. It was an exciting day. We had a few people in person and many people online. We are happy to say that we did place 159 students in their home school. We have 19 students on our waiting list. They come from the Wayside section of town and Wanamassa. Everyone at the OTES school was placed. So 19 students remain on the wait list, and we have a total of 27 seats. 7 of those are at OTES and 20 of those are at Acelero Learning Center. So the first thing we're going to do now is to call the 19 people on the wait list to see if anyone is interested in a seat at Acelero. Sometimes families have a sibling at Acelero, so trying to figure out where people want to be placed. Anyone who doesn't want to take that seat remains on the wait list, and then we will pull names for the 7 seats at OTES. Again, a person can decline that and just remain on their wait list for their home school. So once we've been able to do all of that, we feel also the 159 families that were placed have until next Friday to register officially. Some people turn away their seats. We've already had one turn down their seat. So once that's all done, we're very hopeful that the 19 people on the waiting list will find a place in our preschool program, and that we will be able to move into next year without a wait list, at least not the original wait list. So we're very excited about that. We did, based on the applications that we received, we had more than enough seats at OTES and not enough seats at Wanamassa. So we did go back to our buildings to review space, and we're able to move what we had planned for at OTES. We were able to move that to Wanamassa so that more students could be at their home school versus less. So that was a good thing. That was a great thing that we were able to find a room at Wanamassa for this. So we're feeling good about where people are placed, and we may need next year one more room. We think possibly we'll see how things shape up as we head into September. But that's the preschool update. And then just a lot of really great things coming up this month, this half of the month. This Thursday night is the district-wide art show at the Township Library. All of our student artwork from kindergarten to 12th grade will be on display at that library, and there's sort of the gallery opening that evening. The artwork stays up past Thursday night, but Thursday night's the kickoff. Our intermediate school has Mean Girls Junior starting this weekend also. High school has Mean Girls playing later in the month, 2 weeks, I think, from now. And then also we have next Tuesday night, the Monmouth County School Boards Association 8th grade dialogue, and I believe Mrs. Gilman will be in attendance there to represent the Board of Ed. All right, so that concludes my report.
Thank you. We will move on to the school business administrator's report. Mr. Hastings.
I'll withhold my comments for the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Corrales. I just wanted Mr. Hastings for the role to know that Ms. Gilman is online in
Very
case
good,
you weren't
thank you.
sure about that.
Okay. Right now we'll move into our public comment regarding agenda items. All motions are posted on the district website. At this point in the meeting, we will now conduct the first of 2 public comment sessions. The first session will be open for public comments on agenda items only, and the second session will be at the end of the meeting and can be on any topic. being that there's no one in the room except for Mr. Cass, would anyone from the public like to comment on any agenda item at this time? Mr. Cass?
No, I'm good.
Okay, so I will ask Ms. Conway if there's anyone in the queue.
No, Madam President, there are no commenters in the queue.
Okay, thank you so much. And with that, we will move on to financial management, and that would be Mr. Weinstein.
Okay, let me get this up here. Sorry about that.
Budget discussion.
Is that all it says is budget discussion?
Here, right here
Yes.
too for you.
Budget discussion. Oh, yes. Okay, so we're gonna discuss the 2024, 2025 budget. Probably a good idea, Jeff, if you kind of led this discussion, right?
Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Appreciate that.
Jeff with a J. Jeff with a J, yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Weinstein.
no problem.
And thank you, Ms. Conway, for putting up our slides. I'll stay here unless anybody wants me to make you all turn around for the podium. So we have a couple slides to go through. Again, this is a continuing update on our 2025 school year budget, which, believe it or not, is upon us already. This week, the governor gave his address. Actually, last Tuesday, he gave his address. State aid was released last Thursday. I'm happy to report we did not receive any cuts to our aid. I'm disappointed to report we did not receive any increases really to our aid. So basically for our K-12 aid, we're flat. If we go through and take a look, our transportation aid stayed the same at 1.7 million. And there we had previously thought we might lose a little bit based on our DRTRS report and a slight reduction in transported special ed students. Our extraordinary aid is remaining the same, and that's an estimate of costs that will be reimbursed for, again, for special needs students and some reimbursable services. Our categorical, which is our state aid for special ed students, we did see an increase of $23,000. Security aid stayed flat, and our adjustment aid as well, which is tied to our S2 formula, stayed flat as well. So we're very happy about that. On our preschool budget for 2024, the district had received about 3.3 million based on 209 students. For 25, the district was awarded $4.2 million based on an increase of about 48 students, bringing our total to about 257. So again, that was enrollment driven, and there was a small bump also with a slight increase on a per student aid from the state. So that was great for us in terms of moving that program forward. And the other thing I wanted to point out here on our revenue slide is basically the last item, which you can see says budgeted fund balance additional stabilization aid. And again, that was a special award last year of $32,000 based on a restoration of 2/3 of our lost aid. And we do not expect to do or see any additional aid to the district this year. I've spoken to the county business administrator today about the June legislative meeting and what her opinion or feeling or what she was hearing after the governor's address, where he increased education spending by $900 and some million, increased the preschool spending by about $125 million. So my question to her was that well received, and should we expect any changes come June when the legislature votes on the governor's budget? And her feeling was that we look pretty solid, and we probably should not expect any changes to our aid in June. And again, that's, today, as of today, and with the information we have today, so we can't guarantee anything, but it looks good that we won't have to come back in June and absorb any kind of losses. So that's all good news. Next slide, please. Again, we want to talk about our capital improvements. We did go back and look at the priority 1 items. There's one item on this slide and one on the next slide. We did discuss and touch on our stadium lights at our last meeting, and the need to seriously look at those and the condition that they're in and assess the need to replace them. Going forward, we do have one or two lights that are out that cannot be repaired. In talking to our buildings and grounds supervisor, our lights have been there since his feeling is the 80s, since the mid 80s. We have had the contractor out to look at them and do some repairs on them. But given the proximity to the ocean, the salt air, the corrosion that takes place that we all hear about so often, the internal wiring, the ballasts, those sorts of things are not in good shape. And in certain cases, the repair folks don't want to touch them because they're afraid that they'll disintegrate and not be repairable. So
Can you wait until after he's done?
Well, are we going, so my question is, are we going through this line by line with questions, or do you want to wait till all the things go and then go line by line?
How about when he's done with this slide and
Great.
then, is that okay?
I could go either way.
Okay, great.
So again, one of the ways to look at this is not funding it through our operating budget because it is a large number. But we do have capital reserve that the district sets aside for these sorts of purposes. For these large numbers that come up that we need to replace or make repairs to. The district started at July 1 with about $6.2 million in our capital reserve. The board at its last meeting approved the district's portion of our ROD grant funding. So again, that's for the entire replacement of the roof at Dow. And it's for the completion of roofing replacements at Wayside. So recently we replaced a section of that roof. This project will replace the rest of that roofing material. Aside $2.7 million to address those. And again, 40% is funded through the states, 60% by us, which would leave us a balance of about $3.5 million in our reserve accounts. So our reserve accounts, as you may be aware, are accounts that we set aside again for these purposes. At the end of each school year, if there is funding available, we move money into that account to continue and try and keep that stocked, if you will, or solvent, so that we have money going forward for these sorts of things. But again, it is an option for the district and the board to look at the lights or any other project you may see on here and determine that we'd like to fund that problem through our capital reserve. So the plus to that is it does not impact our 2025 budget in terms of any shortfall or fund it through current operating funds. So again, that's a discussion for the board and the superintendent in terms of priorities and where we are. Again, we like to keep balances in those accounts for these unexpected costs that come up, but the money is available. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions on this slide.
Mr. Weinstein?
Right, so the capital funds designed only for capital expenditures, not all for operating budget and staff, all that kind of stuff, right?
That's
It
correct.
cannot be allocated to that. Okay.
That's correct.
So my question about the 400,000, first off, how long has it been since we had an uplift in the lights?
Since we've had
An uplift in the lights, like, is this like the first major thing that we've had to do in like 10 years, or do you know like what the? Because I can't remember ever seeing this kind of number for lights,
Because it gets cut every year.
because it gets cut every year, so
Yeah.
right, so my understanding is that lights have always been sort of an item that's out there that people are looking for us to address and take care of. The lights.
Taking it
We
down?
did have
Yeah.
a safety concern during football season with one bank of lights going out, and we obviously want to avoid that. That again was a power issue, not necessarily a lights issue, but we are at the point where we can't really count on repairing any of those lights. So my understanding, and folks can correct me who've been here longer, is that this is an item that regularly appears in the budget,
Yes.
but because the cost is not prioritized.
And right now, the capital maintenance budget, is that what you had? What
But we have a capital reserve
capital reserve you feel
and we
like
have a
covers,
maintenance reserve.
covers this well?
Yes.
Well, a comment and a question. I think it's important also to note, like, I think it's always been cut. And I think it's also important to know that the lights are not just used for football. They're used for many, many things, including some you know, like, town soccer practices a lot on our field, pays for our lights to be on at that time. So I think it's important to know that it's not just for one season, a couple of games or whatever. That's number one. Number two, do you know by chance, like how much in the last couple of years we've put into capital reserve? And has it been zero for 5 years? Has it been, you know, we put 100,000 in this year and, you know, it'd be interesting to know how quickly we are usually building that back up. To know that if 200,000, you know, is a number, which I doubt it is, that we put in every year, then it's also almost thinking like this might be a 200, you know, like 200 would have went into capital at the end of the year. You know, just to know maybe if we can see what the history of the deposits in the capital
Right, so
reserve.
really a net reduction of 2 instead of 4 based on an addition. So at the end of each school year in June, we present and the board approves the ability for us to deposit money into the reserve accounts. We usually approve an up to amount. And I believe over the past several years, we have been able to make contributions to that account. So I can get back to you to the board with the
I mean,
schedule,
if
but
other people want to know, I
it's-
just think it'd be helpful to know how
Right.
quickly.
Mr. Schneider.
Little hard time hearing, so if you said this, I apologize, but is it prior for the lights, is it priority one just for the athletic department, or is it priority one from a school function
well,
perspective?
So I would say 2 things. One, it's a priority because they're getting towards end of life. And the fact that we have contractors coming out to look at them that refuse to touch them creates a priority or a need. And as was mentioned, not only do our own athletic teams, our soccer teams, our football teams and others activities that the school participates in, but the community as well utilize that field for different purposes. So again, looking at the broader use of the field, it's considered a priority.
Plus, I believe it to be the touchstone of our school district and a place where all students of all ages come with their families to celebrate different activities and events. I think it adds to the spirit that we have in this school community. And I worry that if we were not able to do this, changing games to daytime and the interference that might have on some of our rec programs, I worry about how that would negatively impact school culture.
Yeah, I agree with everything. So.
Ms. Dam, did you have a question?
More of like a comment question. And to go off what Kelly said and kind of to go off what John said at last meeting, have we talked to the PTA and to the community of what we could possibly do to help with this? In not just using the school budget, but to see what the community and the school can do to also bring this to life. Because like Kelly said, this is the cornerstone of our school. I'm sure there's many people who would love to get involved to make this happen and not just be using just the school budget for that. So have we looked into that? Is that something that we can bring to the community, bring to the PTA?
So I speak with the PTAs.
Yeah.
At minimum, once a month, we meet together, often discussing the struggles they have with raising money
Mhm.
for the programs at their schools. Have not specifically said, are you willing to help fundraise for our lights at our fields? Certainly a topic I can bring up at a future meeting.
Thank you.
Gilman has her hand up in the queue, just so you know.
Okay, was that your question?
No, I'm just telling you the, yeah.
All
Mrs.
right,
Gilman,
thank you
keeps
for
waving
telling
at the
me.
camera.
Go ahead, Mr. Dalton. and
No,
then I'll-
Mrs. Gilman.
Okay, all right, Mrs. Gilman. Ms. Gilman,
You're muted.
Muted.
I'm not online. so-
All right, just to follow up what Caitlin and Amy said, yes, this is a community issue. And instead of the PTA, we might want to pursue community fundraising for this, because my fear is that $400,000 taken out of our capital reserve, so that would leave us with like 3.1 million, but anything can happen to any of our aging structures. And to replace these stadium lights, first of all, I'd like to take a tour of it and see it. I don't know if other board members would be amenable to that, but I'd like to see them firsthand. And secondly, instead of the PTA, Booster Club, other businesses in town fundraising of that sort to put in toward the $400,000. I think we should pursue that as well.
I'm sure we could probably check with like the soccer club and, AYF
I
and,
feel like turf is more.
right, well, that's true. Let's go to Mr. McCarthy.
Well, so I think too. And this is where we get into a gray area with budgets and it gets tough, right? It's like 400,000 can come from anywhere, right? You know, you could apply to something else later on and say like, hey, we are gonna take it out of the capital expenditure. There's abilities to move things around, right? So whether or not somebody is fundraising for that specifically or not is a kind of a question. But so the reason I bring all that up is to say like, in terms of executing this, like can the district right now that is telling us that that this is a priority one requirement, that this needs to be one of our choices for this year, can they operate during budget season right now in the gray area of like, we're gonna start talking to people today about potentially fundraising for that, or is that just gonna push this further down and back you up even further when we're trying to execute a budget? Because that's what I'm worried about. But you know, I like the idea. It was something that I said and continue to pursue. I am not actively, I've said in public session that I think is extremely important. But is it executable right now from the opinions of the district? And would we be better suited as a board to encourage the community to start focusing on things in the future, like a turf field that is going to be used by the entire district, or some other thing that we need money for that maybe isn't priority one today, but we know will be in the future? And like we say this all the time, right? Like we bring this up a lot, that we don't plan as a district for the future because we can't, because the state doesn't give us the opportunity to. Maybe what we can do is start to plan for something that we're going to say that the town is going to bootstrap and figure out themselves. I didn't really give you a question there. So what is your opinion on that? Are we going to impede progress by saying, let's try to push people to fundraise?
We would most likely not be able to wait. We would start working on secondary plans for daytime events. In fear the lights go out at a night event where we create a safety and a security risk.
So the answer to the question is, would we impede progress? The answer is yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Weinstein.
So I guess the line item just sticks out, right? Because that's your only priority one, right? So that's probably one of the things that makes it kind of stick out. The other point that I just want to make is that from my read of this is that our capital reserves is really designed for something like this, right?
Yes, sir.
It's like it's really designed for this. And I would hate for things that the capital reserve is really designed for, to put the weight on the taxpayers you're already paying, to say so they have to jump in and volunteer to help us fund this, right? I mean, we already kind of went through the good governance on how to build up these reserves for things like this, and so we should do that. My thing that I probably would just look at for this is, I would probably say that we should probably look at our facility usage and say to ourselves, are we really taking into account the capital expenditures that occurred down the road, and how maybe figuring out how to address the usage of the facilities by outside parties that are also using this, and how to amortize that amongst people who are using it, so that it doesn't have to be a huge lift for one time, but it could be something cumulative over time that we can figure out how that gets done. My other point is, I'm just a little surprised that nothing else went to priority one, right? And, you know, some of the things that I see here feel like, you know, maybe they should be more on the priority one. And I don't know enough to say that they should be or shouldn't be. It's just when I see some of the things on here, locks placed on bathroom doors, it feels like I've had enough conversations around bathrooms and that kind of stuff where, so I'm just trying to understand. You might be right, I might be wrong, but it just kind of was a stark thing for me to say, why isn't there other things in here? Because I like.
Right, so I think it's easy to see that this could lead you a little bit down a path in terms of priorities. So just from a process standpoint, a couple things happened. So one, we wanted the list. We asked the various administrators, principals, buildings and grounds folks, you know, give us that list of what the capital needs are that you have. And some of these you can see might not even technically be capital. So a box cover for a fire alarm is probably not capital, but they put it there, we'll keep it there, it's
Yeah.
fine. We asked the folks, to accumulate this list for us. We spoke to our buildings and grounds supervisor, said, could you take a look at this? You know, this is in your wheelhouse. You're familiar with our facilities and the ins and outs and what you do day to day in terms of repairs and addressing some of these things. Could you help us look at these and help us evaluate what's a 1, what's a 2, what's a 3? So his input was taken into account here as well. I think the third thing that I would say is some of these things we hope to do through the operating budget to this year. So, you know, things like fire pole covers or bathroom locks and some of these smaller items. You know, well, there are some smaller things, bathroom floors at high school. You know, some of those things I feel very strongly that we can just knock out this year before the year's out. So we can set that money aside. We can put those purchase orders out and get them in place, or, you know, get the supplies that our folks need if they're going to do it themselves and address those things.
Can I follow up to my point, to my question?
Okay.
So I guess the thing that's deceiving here, or maybe not well understood, is priority 1 versus priority 2 versus priority 3. So to maybe to tell me how we're viewing priority 2. Are we viewing priority 2 like some of those things will happen through an operating budget, or?
Yeah, I think 2 ways you could view it, and the fire alarms, again, I keep harping on those, but those could be an example. So one is our buildings and grounds folks say it's just not urgent that we take care of that. It's not an imminent need that we have to take care of. I think the other issue would be, we're going to knock this out this year, so it's not really a priority 1. We'll just say it's a priority 2 because we know at the end of the day, by June 30th, we'll have those things taken care of.
Can I then also assume that priority, can we also assume that priority 3 is probably not in consideration get done this year?
Yes.
Can I assume that?
Yes.
Okay, so we can assume that priority 1 is a must. Priority 2 is we're going to try to figure out as much as we can do on these things, and priority 3 is out.
Yes.
Okay,
I would say that's fair.
okay.
And some of those priority 2s will be back next year, like the lights.
Yes, correct.
And eventually they will have their day.
Cool.
Hopefully.
Just back to the fundraising and looking at the usage and stuff. I think it's also important to see the usage of our own if people are, you know, our own high school for lights, like, you know, and how many also of our teams are using turf more than before. You know, soccer, I would say, plays on turf more than they ever did. A lot of times they played up front, but the varsity team plays mostly on the turf at this point. I do think that to Caitlin's point, I think, and to John's point, we can look at some of these things like the turf field, like the whole vault, pit cover and vault standards, and stage, you know, there's certain things that we could probably look on here that say, this is what we want to target to go out to the community with, and kind of plan that in the next year. But my last thing is, Jeff, is it possible that throughout the year, if you all of a sudden get, and you were talking about the covers for the fire alarms, if you know that ends up happening, can we just get like a quick update somewhere that says it? I've asked for this in years past. I don't know if you're able or want to produce this, and I don't know if the board wants this, but we look at these things, like you said, like, for example, stadium lights that have been on forever. And if we had a running list of things we're trying to do, I think it also would make us feel better at the end of the day to be like, oh, look, we got rid of, like, we were able to do the 5,000, you know, some of these things, and they were able to, you know, go off the budget, because it doesn't feel good to cut some of those things. Sorry, I thought I smelled. Anyway, so if we could get something like that throughout the time, that would be nice to see. And if we can maybe the financial team can meet to discuss, like you said, you know, we've talked about the facilities. Me, Miss Hayes, and Miss Tortorello got through some of that. It needs to be, I think, a whole new conversation, and also to make kind of a list of things that we want to go out to the community about, to start that process ahead of budget next year, and ahead of, even if we say our timeline is 2 years from now to have this really paid for, or part of it, I think would be a good idea, and use of our committee time, possibly.
Good idea. Good discussion.
So I think just from a management perspective, we
Okay.
maintain, and I've spoken to the business office staff, as well as the buildings and ground staff and the IT folks, to give me those lists, give me the all-inclusive list of things from A to Z,
Mhm.
small to big, that we'll maintain as a master. And then as we have funds available, as we make progress through these things, we're going to keep monitoring and updating that list so that, you know, we can knock some things off and maybe some things come on, and, you know, it'll be an ongoing never-ending process of, as things get replaced and things wear out, but, you know, at least we'll have something to refer to and to help us, set priorities.
And it's not just me. I mean, I don't want that just to be an ask from me. I mean,
No, that's
if the
something we're
board-
doing. That's
yeah,
something
so
I
if the
do,
board would
something
like
Mr. Cass
updates
helps me
on,
with.
on some of these things,
Uh,
however you feel you want to bring it back to us at 6, I don't need a timeline on it, but you know, if the board, I don't want to say I want it and it be done. So if the board wants it to some degree of an update from some of these little things.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't think it's a bad idea, even like at the end of the summer, when you've had time to kind of cross off some of these things. How does the rest of the board feel? Does everyone,
Good.
would everyone like to see that? Okay, so maybe the end of August.
Right, and then I try as well, and maybe not on firebox covers, but on other things to update during the business administrators
That is true.
section to try and, you know, keep you up on some larger items.
Yes, you always do a great job with that.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else before we move on?
I have another slide too, so.
Yeah, well, I had a question on just the fidelity of the estimates, like how good do we feel about the estimates? I'm just picking on priority one, that just happens to be, so. And then I have a question on the revenues.
Well, being the finance person, I'm always uneasy about the quotes regardless of when they come in. Because, you know, I could get the quote yesterday and when you start to involve folks, it changes or, you know, in some cases, maybe these are, oh yeah, we did that six months ago. And, you know, then all of a sudden it's the COVID effect and these other things that inflation and, you know, all sorts of things. So, that being said, I do have a level of comfort with these. I've spoken to our buildings ground supervisor. He does have quotes, the lights, for example. I met with the gentleman down at our school board's conference in October, talked to them and the field turf people as well. They have provided quotes in the past. So it's not an unknown number. And we are planning to talk to them again in the near future to again reassess and what are our options and what do those costs look like.
Thank you. And can I ask a question on the revenues?
Sure.
The rents, I noticed that it's fixed like year over year at 262. Like what's our process in paying a rent of so like I think it's so cheap to get a whole school.
And so I think the main driver there is Camp David, which operates out of our intermediate school over the summer. We have a contract with them that has an escalator, a built-in increase year over year. However, that's not a, you know, large increase. So we've sort of just carried that number forward. It's the increase was minimal. So.
I was wondering if the 200,000 or whatever the number is, is that what we have to or obligated to offer, or if you're, I was pricing out some things related to like classroom fees and different things from other districts. And it seems like there could be a lot more opportunity for rent revenue there.
Right, so the 262, 266 includes the fee we collect from Camp David for their summer camp. It's the fees from the Chamber of Commerce, and again, it's facilities use. So Camp David and the Chamber have small increase built into their contracts with us. So they're not significant enough that we really spent a lot of time changing that number, that it would make a significant impact. And then I would just comment on the facility use and when we talk about facility fees, yes, we have folks using our facilities. We have different categories of folks, whether it be nonprofit local groups or for-profit out-of-town groups asking to utilize our facilities. I think one thing to keep in mind is the ability of those groups to raise funds to pay our fees. So, you know, often boards look at those fees and you know, think they're low and look at Pop Warner, AYF, Biddy Basketball, you know, Little League, those sorts of groups, and look at the use of our fees and any overtime we may have to pay for staff to be there, the wear and tear on our fees, and can calculate out a fee that we may need to refurbish or maintain those fields and those facilities. However, the caveat, I suppose, or the asterisk is what is the ability of these groups to raise funds and to pay those fees? So it's always sort of a balance of how can we recover costs? How can we maintain these facilities and keep them in good shape? But how can we also be responsible community partners in making these facilities available to these groups so that kids have a place to play and to do their activities?
And it's
We
the same
always have the
taxpayer.
revenue side of it, but there's costs associated, maintenance, insurance and different. things like
Absolutely.
that. So I didn't know if when you think about the rent, like, are we still profitable? Or we really only make 100,000. Is there opportunity to increase the rent to probably more a standard number in the future?
Right, so some of those fees are built into the agreements, so cleanup fees and those sorts of things for some of our other groups. That is part of the fee that we're collecting, so we're not out of pocket on those sorts of things. And in fact, for some of those groups, we utilize those fees to offset the overtime or the cleanup that our custodians have to take care of. Some of the other things that happen is that, you know, sometimes these facilities are being used while our custodians are there. So it's not really a duplicate cost because the custodian is there. He's responsible or she's responsible for, you know, that evening shift and we'll be cleaning those areas anyway. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one, you know, cost.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide.
Thank you. I'm not sure this is as sexy as the lights, but we do have a dump truck that our facilities folks are looking to replace. We have a 2001 Dodge dump truck that is now 23 years old. It is suffering from rust and all kinds of other things. It was described to me as a Fred Flintstone mobile in terms of the rust and things that are starting to go wrong with it. The vehicle is used for snow removal. It's a plow, and when I say snow removal, they also load snow into the back of it to then move it out of the parking lots into a more centralized location. We use it for our grounds, for clay, for dirt, for moving those sorts of things around. We use it for salting, use it for branches and removal of large debris. So again, that's something that, again, a 23-year-old vehicle that's not in the best shape, and our facility supervisor feels strongly that is something we should consider replacing in the near future. And again, that's something that we could, again, look at our capital reserve and say, you know, for 86,000, which is a fairly recent quote. And I spoke to him today about that, knowing it may be raised, and he feels fairly confident that we could hit that number or maybe even a little bit less based on what we purchased.
Mr. Weinstein.
So I guess the challenge with this slide is that priority 2 has a number of things that are fairly substantial in size. And so since we basically said number 3, category 3 is out and number 2 is in, do you have an idea like how do we accommodate some of the things in 2? And I guess the one that sticks out the most is this elevator, right? And what the thinking is behind that.
So those last 5 items or so that say admin next to them address this building in particular. I think the planning and construction committee or planning and development committee gave a report out at the last meeting that we continue to meet with the city in terms of options that are available to us for partnerships. We've put these items on here, which basically represent just sort of structural issues that should be taken care of should we decide to move forward with remaining in this location. They're sort of there to keep the board aware of what those numbers look like and helping you make decisions going forward in terms of the future of central office and where we are. Again, if you look at our architectural review of this building, I believe the number was closer to 15 million in terms of rehabbing it from stem to stern, and you know, in terms of even paving the gravel areas and putting up stop signs by the driveways and you know, all sorts of things that that would go into a renovation. So again, these are items that we would look at. The elevator enhancing the ADA compliance issue, We do have lifts here to get folks into the building. But again, the elevator is something that has been assessed as a need. Roof replacements, again, to seal up the building, keep it waterproof, keep everything dry inside. And then addressing the HVAC system so that we have a more controlled and less noisy heating and cooling system in place. So those are really not necessarily two, but they are sort of something that the board needs to be aware of and perhaps may want to address moving forward as we continue with those conversations.
Who did?
Irene has her hand up.
Ms. Gilman.
That $86,000, is that for a brand new dump truck, Mr. Hastings?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a possibility of looking at a used vehicle at auction that might bring that cost down? I know it's a 23-year-old vehicle, but might we look around for a used one that might be serviceable for our buildings and grounds?
Only if you promise not to yell at me when it breaks down, 2 months after.
When we're plowing the snow.
Yes,
I know.
I did
But
have.
that estimate then is for a brand new one, 2024.
Yes, ma'am. So I did talk to the buildings and grounds supervisor again about the vehicles and about new versus used. The district in the past has purchased some used vehicles in terms of vans.
Mhm. Yep.
Specialty trucks for plumbers or HVAC folks. And again, we've had some success with those and we've had some, not many, but one or two misses as well. So, we wind up sort of in a catch-22 in terms of we may save a little bit of money buying a used vehicle, but when and if it does break down, the question is, why didn't we buy a new one? So,
Yeah. Thank you.
not to say that we won't do it, but it's a consideration.
Yes, Mr.
A
Schneider.
curious question, being a finance guy, have you ever assessed whether it makes sense to buy it or maybe do a capital lease and see how the costs over time would be fair?
Yeah, so we were having that conversation about buses recently. So whether we want to buy buses outright or whether we want to lease them going forward. And the question becomes sort of, we do a one-time purchase for $125,000 for a bus. Or maybe we buy three, so that's, getting up towards $400,000. That's a one-time layout of money. Whereas if we leased it, we could certainly have a lower annual payment on those over maybe the course of 5 years. But then it becomes a compounding, if you will, issue in that each year we're going to need to either buy and or lease more vehicles. So where does that sort of monthly or annual fee on a lease compound and such that you're sort of paying the same amount you would to purchase them? So yes, we look at both options and we try to do what's best for the district and be wise purveyors, users of the funds that we're given and trust. So, yep.
Okay.
Next slide, please. So again, at our last meeting, we talked about our technology improvements and the fact that our list is financially not as burdensome as it has been in the past, and that the district has been able to make some significant upgrades over the course of the past several years in terms of outfitting our server rooms at the schools and in this building with new equipment, new switches. We've upgraded the wireless system throughout the district as well and made some significant investments in our infrastructure. We continue to look at that and want to create an infrastructure that's open to all platforms. So whether it's PCs or Apple devices or any other sort of device, we want our system to be able to be flexible enough to accommodate those things. And looking at what's on this list for this year, we felt like we could absorb those into the operating budget. So those priority one intercom systems, the printer for our CST folks are been placed back into our operating budget. So those will be taken care of within the budget for 2025. And as we sort of noted on some of those capital items as well, Mr. Gestel, our network manager, has been fairly active in replacing and or adding some new cameras around the district. So again, some of the places where you see new security cameras, we are already moving forward with replacing those out of this year's budget. So we're confident that we can take care of some of these requests immediately. Next slide, please. So we have talked about the revenue side, and we've talked about some of our capital and technology improvements going forward. We wanted to give the board a sort of 20,000-foot look at where we are and what we're looking at. So again, our revenues were estimated about $84.2 million. When we look at our salaries, benefits, our out of district, our utilities, and our other costs that go into the district and running our day-to-day operations, we're looking at about $85 million in costs and asks, which leave us about $900,000 short right now. Those numbers are being looked at. We're looking at other opportunities to create savings, other funding options in terms of how we utilize our reserves, as we've just discussed, but are again looking at a deficit situation in terms of what our current expenditures are versus our current revenues. If we look at also adding back a lot of the requests that we have trimmed back, you're looking at adding another $892,000 to our requests. So again, you're pushing that deficit up, 1.5, getting in the neighborhood of $2 million of a shortfall. So this sort of leads us to our next slide in terms of our local levy and our revenues and how we look at those. So on the left is our current tax levy of $71 million. We're looking at the opportunity or the availability, if you will, to increase that tax levy. There's a cap in place throughout the state of 2% in terms of increase on the tax levy. When the district does not take increases in any given year that it could have otherwise taken, that goes into a bucket called banked cap. Those funds hang around for 3 years before they expire. So the district basically has 3 years to utilize those funds before they expire. We can see that we have an expiring bank cap of $200,156, which would add about 0.28% to our increase. There's a total available bank cap between the expiring year and the current year of $400,000. So it's two $200,000 pieces basically. Then I've changed the number on my sheet here because we've again tweaked our numbers and put in some additional data into the state system. And currently our healthcare waiver is estimated at about $613,000 that's available for the district to raise based on healthcare waivers. So that's when the costs of our benefits see significant increases and we're allowed to ask for a waiver from the state. And this year we have $613,000 basically available to us to utilize. On the right-hand side, just for historical purposes, you can see year over year what the board has done in terms of increases in the levy. So you can see it's ranged over the course of about 10 years here, from about a 1.3 up to a 3 in terms of the increases year to year in any given year. So again, looking at our shortfall and looking at the opportunity to raise funds, this is one area that could be discussed in terms of. Yes, sir.
Hold on a second. Yeah, I just want to ask a couple questions for my knowledge. Healthcare, we're in healthcare benefits.
We are.
Okay. And I'm trying to remember, we don't know our actual increases until December. Because they
Um,
follow the school budget year. correct?
Right, so they're on a calendar year, they're January through December.
Right.
So we have the current increase that just took effect in this past January, so we have,
You have no idea what's going to happen for next.
that's correct. So we're forecasting the second half of the year based on the current rates. And then we've spoken to our broker, we've had meetings with our shared services insurance carrier group and get guidance from them in terms of what they think that number may look like going forward. And unfortunately, over the past couple of years, those have been significant bumps. But we have incorporated those increases into our budget model, our budget forecast for next year. So that is part of the overage that you see, that increase is incorporated in there.
And I know you're not here long, I just want to ask them, have we ever gone out of state health benefits and gone like private or with a larger group or anything?
No, I think we've only gone into it.
Okay. I know districts have gone both
Back
ways.
and forth.
Back and forth, and based on experience rate, that could change. You know, depending on your experience rate as a district.
Right, so we would have to,
You'd have to go out to bid on that.
well, we'd have to notify the state of
Yeah.
our intention to move out. We'd have to get a copy of our experience or in terms of what we've contributed to the system versus what's going out.
So I'm just, some
and-
districts have gone that way.
You know, that number, the experience number would be a main driver in terms of the attractiveness of us to say Horizon as a private as opposed to a state program.
Right.
The other thing we'd have to do is also part of that process is not only going out, we'd have to provide equivalent or better coverage in terms of our staff. And we'd also then have to show the state that we're saving money based on
Right.
that move. So.
There's a whole process. to go
Yes.
through. Yeah.
Yep.
That's a significant increase each year, of course.
Someone else have a question? Oh, I didn't see you. You're right in front of me.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding the anticipated expenditure slide. So just for my knowledge, that out of district tuition, the $4.3 million, that is for what exactly? Just for my knowledge.
So that's for our special needs students
Okay.
who are placed in
Okay,
outside of the district.
okay.
And-
And then with the, like the capital improvements, where is that located in the anticipated expenditures? What line is that?
So the capital expenditures that we are incorporating. So the capital expenditures that I talked about in terms of ones we're going to discuss and try to take care of this year are not in this budget. 'Cause
Okay.
It's for next year's budget.
Okay.
And the
Got it.
lights and the trucks that we discussed in terms of needs for next year would come out of our capital reserve. So again, that would be a draw from a different account and it's not in this budget.
So it's not even sorry.
Do you have amortization of that capital equipment in these lines?
Hold on, Mr. Schneider.
Yeah.
Let's finish this question. Are you all?
Yep, I'm good.
Are
Thank
you all
you.
good?
Yep.
All
I'm
right.
just clarifying on what was just said. So that 562,000 or something is not in the 914 or the 1.8?
I'm sorry, can you,
So the 562
that you're seeing.
capital,
Yes.
the capital. And now if we're looking at that anticipated expenditures, is that not in the net gain loss or the requested addition? Or is it,
correct?
so it's not in there at all? So you've already removed it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Because we would not take that expense out of our operating budget.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mr. Schneider?
Jeff, is the amortization of the capital expenses, do they come into the operating expense budget, or is that from a funding formula standpoint? We just look at the total budget in terms of cash out or versus revenues.
Right, so it's cash out the door, yes.
Mr. McCarthy?
So are we to decide here or in future meeting whether or not we're gonna go with the 0.28% increase out of the bank cap or the 0.56?
Well, so.
Is that why that's posed to us like this? Yes.
Well, this is to keep you aware of where we are
The option.
in terms of revenues and expenditures, what the options are in terms of raising additional revenues. My last slide was just gonna be to remind the board. That on the 12th, we have our workshop meeting. At the 12th, we will be approving a tentative budget. So we will be putting together a budget utilizing the state software that's gonna have to balance and has a lot of, attachments and stuff that go into it. It's tentative because it could change as we change priorities or continue to discuss priorities. But that tentative budget, is gonna be basically set. March 20th, that has to be submitted to the county. So we have to officially approve the tentative budget at a board meeting and have the resolution passed, which is the 12th. By the 20th, we have to submit it to the county for them to review. And then we get into the end of April, beginning of May, to then approve the final budget. So the final budget will be a reapproval of the tentative budget without any changes, or it'll be an approval of the budget with changes, in which case we'll, maybe have an additional resolution, or it might read a little differently than it otherwise would have.
Mr. Weinstein.
But to John's question, depending on what you all wanna recommend as far as the budget goes, we'll determine if we use the bank capital that expires and what percent of the bank capital that does not expire. Right? And you'll recommend we either use 200 and 400 or 200 and 300 or 200 and 100 and that will be a recommendation based on how all this stuff comes together. Right?
Yes.
All right, help you with the interpretation of it.
Yeah, so what are we, I guess what's confusing me then, because we have an option here to go from a 1.75 increase or a 2% increase plus our bank cap. That we have two options to choose from with that as well, right? Is it,
So there's several.
aren't you asking the board to advise you tonight on what we expect out of this district for?
We're showing the historical
Yeah,
perspective
yeah.
of the action of this Board of Education over time, and then
Right.
showing you the different options and getting some sort of consensus based on what is the board's
Yes.
comfort level with using these different sources.
So there's multiple options that could come out of this.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mr. Dalton.
Just want to restate it, so, because I'm hearing all the questions and I want to make sure we're all getting on the same page. right?
yes,
So we're
as do I.
talking about the expiring bank cap. We're talking about the bank cap. We're talking about the healthcare waiver, right? And any combination. Am I correct, Mr. Hastings? And any combination of those and what we believe as a board representing the community. And then I just am looking and I appreciate, thank you, going back to 2013, because I think of what what occurred with S2. And, you go back to 13, 14, 14, 15, 15, 16, where we were less than 2% and the cumulative effect of that and where we are now. And so we have 5 years out of the years represented here where we went to the less than 2%. And as a result of that and S2, we are now in this situation where we're having to make some really tough decisions as a board and consider our taxpayers. And it's a very tough balancing act right now. But I'm hearing multiple things we can consider and combinations or partial or whatever we feel we have to.
but as a point of inquiry, the expired bank cap versus the bank cap is either or, but not both, right? We have the
Well, the
ability to go
board-
all the way up to 400,000,
Yes.
should we choose to as a board.
Yes.
But the expired portion we cannot get back
It's 200.
is 200,000. So we have a minimum of 200,000 up to a ceiling of 400,000 that we can take in addition to either a 1.75% budget increase or a 2% budget increase. Is that a correct interpretation of what is proposed on this slide?
Yes, the 1.75 and the 2% is just to give you an idea of what that equates to dollars in terms of how it would impact the budget. The 2% is the cap. What you increase this year affects what you increases next year and the year after in terms of just compounding and what number you're compounding. And then there was also the healthcare waiver as an additional source of funds.
Which we're forced in that number.
Forced.
I mean, that if we don't go out of state to another opportunity, right, that is an addition to our budget that we can't impact.
Well, may I? unless we didn't do that and then we're cutting other things, right?
Right, yeah, yeah, I'm not proposing that we cut that, I'm
Right.
saying like.
We have to pay for
We-
the healthcare, but the
Correct.
waiver is,
What I'm trying to illustrate the point to anyone listening and also myself for my own personal benefit that. We have a 2% limit proposed by state or required by the state, and right now I'm looking at 0.58% of that 2% limit is already taken up by a healthcare requirement that we have no choice but to take for our staff, correct? Or no? I'm interpreting that wrong.
It's on top, the
Yeah.
0.58.
Yes, go ahead, Mr.
So
Wine.
just to be clear. 2% is the maximum that we can have without going out for referendum.
Yep, correct.
All these other
As
things are,
required by the state.
all these other additions are on top of that where we don't have to go out for referendum. So we can add 0.28%, we can add 0.56%, we can add 0.58% with these different categories that we can put onto the budget and not go out for a referendum.
Yes, I understand that, but we don't have a choice on a healthcare waiver.
no, so we have to pay the healthcare, but
Right.
because the cost went up so much, we're allowed a waiver that allows us to increase that 2% to
To
2.58%.
Okay, so the state is giving us an opportunity to
They're
raise
giving
up
us
to
a-
0.58% as a base.
As a
Without referendum.
reaction to the
Understood. Okay.
increase in healthcare
And
costs.
just one other clarification, just is that there's a $200,000 expired bank. And there's a separate bank of 400,000.
No,
No, there's a 200
2 and 2.
expiring.
And the 200,000 is a
additional
subset of the
200 that is-
400,000.
Yes.
Okay,
I mean, it's a floor and a
yeah,
ceiling.
yeah.
Mr.
I
Dahl.
just want to be clear because I think Mr. Hastings mentioned this with the slide. The healthcare that is on the slide, you said has been updated and it's actually more than that, correct?
It's $613,000,
Okay, I
yes,
just want to make sure we're all talking about the same numbers.
And then what percentage does that equate to?
0.86.
So we have the ability to go to a 2.86
No, we have
ceiling
plus the 0.56.
plus the bank cap,
Plus the bank.
plus the bank cap of our choosing.
Ms. McGovern.
So in what we're saying, and just to make what John say and everything clear, we, at this moment, not that I would think speak for this room to say that we can go with the 1.4 million, like the with the 2%, which is 1.4, plus 400,364, plus now it's 610 or whatever it is but let's just say the 410, 840. So I've added those three numbers as they are on the slide, which is 2,237,548 is basically the number that we can raise everything to without going out for referendum for a vote. I know that none of us want to be at that high, but that is what we can do without a vote. Okay, and right now, if we had everything in there minus the capital out of it, everything that we've seen at this point is 1.807, 156. So that's the requested additions or that's
Right, so I think the number's a little bit lower based on,
right.
Right.
Okay, but I just want to make sure, I think, so usually at this point, I would say is when we kind of go with what we think our direction should be. Is I would say as board members in some ways, or no, are we I know that I don't want to spend all of that. I know that I don't want to do the 610 plus the 4 plus the 2%. I would like to try and keep some money reserved as much as we can.
I think it would be a good idea at this meeting to do just that.
Yeah,
We're
so
really running out of time.
yeah,
But
go ahead.
I'd like to hear Mr. Schneider.
I
Go
have
ahead.
a question, and it's really for anyone that's listening out there. So what we're talking about in terms of these additions to avoid referendum. We were able to increase our rateable from 2 to 3 per 3.1% without having to ask taxpayers to vote on it. But ultimately, it ends up as a tax increase to the homeowners.
Correct.
Mr. Weinstein.
The only challenge we have is that we don't have the exact recommendations from you all about what we should be doing, right? Or what you think is imperative that we invest in, right? So that's really so today's meeting was not to actually decide on anything, I didn't think.
No,
It
we're
was
not
more-
voting.
It was more to get
We're not voting.
some context of where we thought all these numbers were coming from and how it all looked and what that all meant, right? That
Right,
was
so
my impression.
So as I said, next week, we're gonna present to you a tentative budget. That tentative budget is gonna have a revenue number in there to help us balance it. And I think what we're looking for is guidance on terms of where that revenue number is gonna be based on these options.
Could I ask you both what your recommendations are?
I mean, I think we should seriously consider the capital reserve for the light so that we can move that and the truck, so we can move that out of here. And then I think that we would like the board to consider at least some of these other options for us to help minimize other cuts that we have to make.
Mr. Hastings,
Speak
do you have
for you,
anything to
but-
Ms.
add?
Gilman is
No.
also.
Ms. Gilman?
Yes, so I'm trying to understand this and everybody's clarified it. Why wouldn't we use the $200,000 expiring banked cap? That money is going to go away? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes,
Okay, so that's kind of a given. And you're saying that at 2.58, we would still not have to go out for a referendum. What is the number where we would have to go out for a referendum?
well, we don't have to go out for a referendum. What we're trying to do is balance the budget. So we have these options available
Yes.
to us to raise funds. And then it's gonna be a question of what can we eliminate from the budget? What cuts can we make to bring those expenditures down to meet that revenue number?
Okay. But at this point, the number is 0.58 over the 2% cap, correct?
No, so you'll see next to the cap, if we added the $200,156, the increase
Yes,
would be 2.28%. If
okay.
we decide to do the 400,000 instead of the two,
It-
it would be
It's
two,
2.56%.
right? We've updated your number to 612,905. And that
That's both of the caps, right?
represents
No,
point,
it's not both of the caps. It's not both of the caps.
that's the healthcare
Not
waiver,
both. Oh, that's the healthcare, okay.
and that would be 0.86.
Okay. And that is recommendation at this point.
No. I don't
Okay. No,
What I said was I recommend that we seriously consider the capital reserve for the capital items. And that the board look
for
at,
the stadium lights and the truck.
and that the board look at some of these options. Perhaps the expiring bank cap and a portion of the healthcare to help offset the other cuts that we would have to make.
Okay, that's clearer. Thank you.
Mr. McCarthy.
I don't see why we wouldn't use the expiring bank cap.
So to respond to that, just to play devil's advocate and to also, sorry, like further clarify my understanding, the reason we wouldn't use it is because you still have to go to the taxpayer and take that money from them. It's just the state is telling us that we are allowed to take an additional 0.28% without penalty
Correct.
or requirement to go to
Right.
referendum, because in previous years, this district was fiscally responsible and saved that money.
Remember, Ms. Gilman, that money isn't sitting,
Right, it's not, so it's in. It's expiring.
unfortunately.
It is still going to be taken from the taxpayer in a budget increase.
Okay,
That is why one may make the argument that we
But
shouldn't
not,
take that money.
correct.
I'm making that argument right now.
Mr. Wine.
Yeah, I just want to kind of follow up on Johnson, because I was thinking the discussion that started happening was we're allowed to go up to this without a referendum, right? Which that was just a point of clarification. I mean, as a school board, we want to be fiscally responsible with attaching ourselves to what the objectives and the learning objectives and the social objectives are of the school district, right? So we don't want to be reckless and say, hey, you know what, we're going to not do the 2%, we're going to do the 1%, and we're going to get this to the bare bones because we want to figure out how to save taxpayers' money. We want to figure out how to have a vibrant school district that actually has all the expenditures it needs so it can work in the way our superintendent feels like it should work, right? and we could be proud of. So I think there was probably, I just don't want everybody thinking that our objective was how to keep us under the referendum. So we don't have to go out to vote. Because I would say if there was another choice which said, hey, you know what, we really should spend over the referendum because we were in a really bad spot as a school district, I would be an advocate for the other side, which I know might not have good favor for everybody. But I think we're saying that we can run a good school district. We can have all the investments we want, make the proper investments, and we can still stay under what's allowable for us to be able to go through the referendum, right? And that's what I'm a proponent of. Right. So I just want to make sure you have that
Okay.
clarity.
Responding to Jeff's point, I think it's fair, so that's our goal of the board, but how do you know what the right balance of school activities are to finance these type of requests that are coming in? So for instance, if we have, and I go back to this point I asked earlier, the state requires us to do certain things. So what does our budget include that minimally makes that requirement possible? And what over or above that minimum is built into the budget so we can be better informed to make these type of decisions on how we balance the budget with either increased taxes or cuts?
So you have the tech and the capital in front of you, the operating costs, as we said, we have gone back to the administration to trim that as much as possible. The last section is personnel. And so, without personnel is a topic that we don't get into too much detail here, but there are definitely positions that are not mandated by the state. However, we believe they greatly impact the learning of the students that they work with, and that a school district would be remiss to not have those positions. So it's really, some of that is relative. If that's what you're asking me
Not
to
debate that, but like you could, we could have a conversation in a public setting about SEL, so how much does that benefit our district versus, hinder kids? And how much is required from the state versus how much more are we investing into that program? I don't know, there's personnel, there's cost to run the program, as an example. So whether we want to be as a board, funding that whole entire Cadillac of possible requirements, or are we at least where we need to be, or do we have to fund some additional stuff in this budget to get us up to those minimum requirements? I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying those types of components of the budget discussion are helpful. Understand what are the things that are out there that we can consider.
Okay. Mr. Dalton.
Just history, Ms. Weldon, I think you mentioned this. Last year we cut how many positions?
29.
Prior years, did we cut positions when S2 hit?
We have not that many. Yeah.
So was last year our biggest?
I would say last year was our biggest. Years before, we cut positions, but then included some positions because we were receiving grant funds during those years. So we moved things from operating budget to grant funds. We have grant funds coming off the end of this year. So we've been in a cutting mode.
And as discussed at more recent meetings, we've also seen an increase in some of our needs for staffing when it comes to things like serving our ELL population and things like that. And other things that the state in their infinite, all right, I was trying, requires us to do. And so, we, as much as we've cut positions, we also have situations where we must fill positions because of changes in our population, special education needs to change.
Right.
With new registrants on a dime.
Right. The state does not hand out a list of you must have these positions. And there's no negotiation on that. That doesn't happen. The state will say things like you have to meet, every student is going to be assessed. And what do you need to do in your district to make sure that every student has the services that they need to be successful on state assessments, or to meet certain number of students in special education classes? Can't go over certain limits, or you have to hire instructional assistants to support classrooms that do go over a certain limit. But the state really only puts a classroom size limit on kindergarten. So, but we would make a decision administratively of what a good class size is to have an effective educational setting. But that's not required. We could raise class size to 30 kids in a class except for kindergarten, but we try not to do that because we do not think we'll see the outcomes that we want to see in settings like that. So we don't have, to your question, I don't know that we have exactly what you're looking for as these are required and these are not. And we have all of these things here that are not required. And that adds up to this amount of money.
Or the program, as we would call it, it has a certain cost associated with it to run it, whether it's capital expenses in terms of equipment that's at the schools, or there's additional teaching and different things like that, so we can see what these programs cost, because it's important for the taxpayers to understand some of the things that we have our hands tied with versus what we're trying to deal with in order to make decisions to run the school effectively, to meet all the kids' needs.
Mr. Weinstein.
Yeah, I think, yeah, just Brian, just your comments. I think we're, I think that's a slippery, not a slope to go down. I think at the end of the day, we're looking for our superintendent to tell us, look, this is the kind of stuff we need in our school district to make it successful. And she, at this point, with the guidance of her administration, is basically saying this is the stuff we need to do to kind of balance out these things, right? And I'm, I'm pretty confident as a school district, we're doing much more than the bare minimum, right? So the things we're talking about are not how to get to the bare minimum. I don't want to get into the management of that level, right? That's not our responsibility. I think we're looking hard for Kelly to give us a sense of here's how she thinks the dollars should be spent. Here's the things that should be done. And I think us going down this line by line item are those things that are more subjective than other things that we weigh in on. And we can say to ourselves, you know what, we don't care about lights. Everybody bring a flashlight and we're gonna light up the field on our own, right? But we can say different things, but we're looking for her to basically say, you know what, this is what I think we need for our school district and kind of balance it out. So I'm really not that, I'm already assuming that we are doing the required minimum in all areas to be satisfied as a school district. And everything else is we're deciding what to do with. And I think that's what we're looking for her to kind of make those recommendations on. And I think going through this budget line item is really part of that process to say what we like, we don't like, and that's that. I just want to say that we're supposed to be appreciative of your opinion on this and weighing that when we're looking at these things.
And I'm totally, and I trust everything. I'm also very new to the process and I come from a different perspective.
Understood.
Yeah.
Mr. Dalton.
Yeah, I would just add, just perspective wise and looking at the last number of years and all of the questions, I think it's a good discussion. Some of the things that we're talking about, SCL, whatever, one decision changes that and causes another situation, right? Class size, what staff we do have, it all matters when you look at that, right? And you start to cut and you have to be really careful because when you do one thing, you impact others. And I think we just need to be judicious and really listen to what the administration is saying. But I also think we need to look at our history and realize why we're here and that we've had cuts recently and what do we want for our schools and our community balanced with what our responsibility to our taxpayers. And I like to think of this as a long-term thing. 10 years out, when someone looks at that chart and we may not be the board members sitting here, what are they going to see and what are they going to have to carry this school district into the future? And I think we just need to be very careful about balancing that and thinking what our students need, our teachers need, and our administration needs.
Okay, thank you. One more question, Mr. McCarthy?
I do just want to, because we do have a little historical perspective. Last year, when we made the cuts that we made, we did also look at the data and show that there was a massive increase in our massive decrease in our student population that did not reflect our teaching population, right? So, and it was pointed out, hey, we had some more, we had an increase in our ELL population. We had an increase in our special education population, right? And those things require more staff, right, to play into those things. But it was also pointed out that, during the pandemic, we did not want to put any of our teachers or staff in a position where they would have to question how they're going to be putting food on the table during a time when there was already so much turmoil and things like that. So we're also, what isn't showing in here is that, those tough decisions that we made, and that we have to continue to make as a district, personally, nobody wants to talk about these things, but we do have to remember that not only 29 positions is a big amount, but we still had room left on that, and we were really tightening that up as much as we could last year, and a lot of that was reduced by retirement, right, and things like that. So I think that, Kelly, my encouragement to you would be, I know that it's not easy to do, but that we need to really consider those tough questions, because this is such a large portion of our budget, and our budget has decreased by almost $2 million from the state. And staff is the only area where we can remove a recurring expense annually. And I know that that is not what wins friends and influences people, but it's an unfortunate realization that we have to come to as this district, especially in a year where, a 3% budget increase is not going to work, in my opinion, whether we have a cap or not. It's not, I don't think it's a good situation for us to be in as a district, personally.
Anyone else?
I just want to say one thing.
Mr. Schneider.
Thank you. Sorry about
No,
that.
go ahead.
No, he had his hand.
Kelly, I had a question. I was trying to string together a couple of things. I saw on the listing of the bill from Jeff, and I was these things, and I was gonna set up a meeting to discuss that. But you mentioned about the preschool and the 20 kids that would probably, if they wanted to, go to Acelo.
Accelera.
Accelera.
Mhm.
Thank you. There is a cost to that, right?
Or, no, we
With the
are
state.
funded
We are-
those are Ocean Township classes at Accelera Learning Center. And the preschool expansion funding.
Okay.
We get money
To pass through.
to pass through to
To
them.
pass through.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
We get the tuition, and
Pass through.
Yep.
Okay,
I was-
thank you.
Ms. McGovern,
The
and
only
I
thing-
know Irene's.
And
hands up, too.
this last statement I'm gonna make, just to remember the 29, and for history for the three of you, 29 positions as John spoke to did not equate to 29 people. That's like important
Correct.
to know,
Right.
just
That
so,
is correct.
I mean,
Ms. Gilman? With your hand up?
Well, yes, I did. Thank you. Speaking from experience, we're talking about people versus things. And what has always made Ocean Township unique has been our staff, our personnel. And I know that cutting personnel is not your first choice. I know that there's been quite a few retirements, and through that attrition, we've been able to shuffle things around. But what I, in my mind, think about the impact of those people leaving and how easy it is to, let's just farm those other students out and not replace that person, and the impact that it has on the teachers who have to absorb those students and meet their needs. If we're looking down the road and we want to maintain the kind of quality school system that we've always had, that I have been a part of, I would say that should be our last choice, is to cut personnel. I know that it doesn't equate to a dump truck. I know it doesn't equate to stadium lights, but I know that the impact of not replacing personnel or, trying to find classes, farming them out, has a huge impact. We've seen huge change in our numbers for ELL and for special ed, and we've had to adjust personnel in that manner. And I know that the choices are very hard for administration and for supervisors and administrators to have to sit down and decide who's going to have larger classes, who needs to be replaced or not. But those 29 positions that we discussed, no, they did not mean 29 people. And I hope that the same care is given this year as we go forward, and that a number next week is made available to us so that we can get a general picture of what the administration is thinking in terms of personnel.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Gilman. Okay. anything else from our administrators? No? Okay. All right, let us move on to old business. Does anyone have any old business?
Yeah, if the legislative liaison committee could just check, we had a new time proposed by the senator's aide. So just review that and get back to me immediately so I can confirm yes or no to that new time proposed. It's slightly earlier the same day. So please just review that and get back to me. Shoot me a text tonight if you like, whatever works for you.
Thanks, Mr. McCarthy. I actually just want to remind the board that we have our ethics training next week on the 12th, and it will be Mr. Taylor coming in to give us that. Mr. Weinstein looks so
I should
excited.
have also added though, if if this conversation about budget and all these things spurs on any questions that you have for Trenton about what they are doing with what the money that we're receiving, please propose that to me prior to our meeting on March 18th, potentially at 9:45 a.m. You have up until midnight. Okay, please.
All right, Ms. Gilman, you're good, right? No old business?
I will discuss the school business, the school board's administrators meeting that I went to. I think I'll do that next week.
Okay, thank you. Any new business from the board? Mrs. McGovern?
I emailed you all today just that there was a T-shirt that SEPTA and our special education department was putting together. It's in your email if you want to order it. It's $15. It's due tonight or either tonight or tomorrow. I just wanted to make sure if you didn't see my email that you're aware of it. And it is a T-shirt that they're asking the students that purchase it to wear on Fridays in April for autism awareness. It is an autism based shirt, and I personally purchased one and will be wearing it for the April regular meeting.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? All right, with that, we will move on to public comment. Does anyone? Mr. Cass, no, you will pass. All right. Ms. Conway, is there anyone in the queue with any public comment on any item?
Yes, there is, Madam President. Alex Hayes, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Fantastic news on the pre-K numbers. I think that's awesome. I just wanted to give a shout out to the boys' 8th grade basketball team. They're literally right now in the run for the Roses tournament over at St. Rose's. Mr. Dalton and Mr. Schneider, it's kind of hard to hear you both for the folks that are at home. I don't know if perhaps you can bring your microphones closer. And while this was a presentation to the Board of Ed, tonight, what was missing, and I know you're not done, but the cost to the homeowners is what is missing. Previous BAs, used to write the charts a little bit differently, so this took a little bit to comprehend. And it sounds like you're going to agree to raise the tax levy above the 2%. But what I didn't see at all was the average homeowner cost. Like last year, we talked about if you have a $500,000 home in Ocean, which is actually kind of low, you will see a $300 increase or whatever. And I think taxpayers are going to want to know that soon, or if it's 600 or whatever. I think those numbers are important, and that's missing, at least from this discussion tonight that I saw. And it took an hour, just to get to, in a perfect world, if we could fully fund this budget and meet our students at where we want them to be, the superintendent thinks we need, and I'd probably agree with her, so that we can have all resources possible. If you include the 600K waiver and the 400K cap, it almost sounds like you guys, if I did my math correctly, can go up to 3.42. 3.42 is what you could go up to. Last year's was 3.01, and not everybody loved that, because that was a significant hike for some people. So that's going to be an interesting message that I think you all will be tasked to, massage to residents. I don't see how you're going to not go around 3% or more. So I disagree with Mr. McCarthy. There is no high school PTA. So I think asking the elementaries and the middle school PTAs to fundraise for the high school fields will not really be appreciated, because each of those 4 buildings struggle on their own to raise money to provide programs that the school districts don't pay for. That's my opinion as a former PTA president of the elementary school. That's like, they're probably going to say, don't touch our money. That's their money to fundraise for. If we're talking about fundraising for the stadium lights, I think it's a double-edged sword to ask residents, to fundraise when you're also raising their taxes. However, I do think there are some people who will think it's worthy. You have have an Alumni Sports Hall of Fame this week. If you don't ask for any sort of money or fundraising at that event, I think it's a missed opportunity. I think it's funny the two of you are mentioning facilities usage today, because I tried for 2 years to get facility uses up. Because as I told the board last fall, the Ocean United Soccer Club, they're not going to be using the school fields next year, starting in the fall, and that the town was installing a turf field, and they're the primary field user. They're the primary renters are these club teams. So I think if you're going to be losing that, even though they're paying pennies on the dollar, I think you need to look and revisit your facilities rental fees, as I think Mr. Schneider and Mr. Weinstein said. But even minor raises this year, this board, didn't want to agree to for at least 5 years or so. But we do rent for much less than other districts in our area, particularly the fields, particularly the turf fields. But good luck. Good luck getting it to get raised. It would be interesting to know, though, who uses those lights. Superintendent Weldon mentioned the rec programs. I'm not aware of any rec evening usage of the turf fields. So maybe there are that I don't know about. I thought it was just the clubs and the high school sports. So hourly usage would be kind of interesting to know. And then it would be helpful to know if we're looking into eco-friendly or low energy lights. We've been tasked as a state to try to meet the climate goals for the governor for 2030. So I'm sure our current ones aren't that great. And I'll leave you with my final comments. As I said a meeting or two ago, I think putting $1.1 million worth of an elevator and maybe another $1 million for HVAC and the roof into that dump of an admin building is a useless discussion. There are buyers that would purchase that property tomorrow, and the middle and high school are at what, 70% capacity. So I hope it stays in category 2, 3, or if you had a category 10, that's where any improvements to the Board of Ed building should go, in my opinion. Thanks.
Conway, is there anyone else?
No, Madam President, there are no commenters.
Okay, I'd like to ask the board at this time for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.